Hello and welcome to AXSChat. We're delighted to welcome back to the show Dave Baines. David has been working in the field for a long time. For those of you that don't know him, he was at AbilityNet and then went over to the Middle East to be the person behind the Mada Center. Now back in the UK as an independent consultant, flies all around the world, looking at how we can include people with disabilities through technology and policy and all sorts of things. One of the reasons why I'm so pleased to have Dave back is he always challenges me and always challenges my way of assumptions, and does it in such a nice way too. So it's like, well, have you thought about this? Oh, I'm not sure I agree with you, but no. So it's fantastic to have you, Dave, because it's really nice to have a real thought leader in the space on AXSChat and someone that has such a great track record. So welcome back.
That's very kind. Thanks very much, Neil. It's lovely to be back with you guys.
Excellent. So there's so much going on in accessibility and disability inclusion at the moment. He says, waving his hands furiously because he's so excited. This week we've had the Global Disability Summit in London in the Queen Elizabeth Park, which was co-sponsored by the UK Department for International Development and the Kenyan government. There were people from all over the world attending, and a lot of commitments made to including people with disabilities. Some launches of various different policies and tool sets, etc. I know that I was there for part of it, as you were, but there was so much going on, you couldn't possibly absorb it all. Then there's lots of stuff going on in the industry right now, and I think one of the things we'd like you to talk to us about and we'd like to discuss is how the disruption in technology is also affecting the disruption in assistive technology and how innovation is taking place in this space.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what we're saying, I think the Global Disabilities Summit was really interesting. And if you think about the pressures that were coming together that brought us to having that summit, so we've got the changes in demographics, we've got increase in terms of geographical diversity of people wanting to be involved in technology, we've got huge economic pressures. All of these factors are coming to bear, and they bring us into this Global Disability Summit, really, and also stimulated by the UN Convention. But those pressures, those first three pressures, are exactly the same ones that we're seeing impacting on how technology impacts, how technology is brought to bear and how people are using it. It's that issue of the demographic, including the aging population, the economics, austerity, reductions to budgets, and the technology, and this huge shift in technology. And I don't think we've ever seen as many influences on change as we're seeing at the moment.
I think you're right. It's something that within Atos and our scientific community, which is like our think tank, we're trying to address and come to grips with, and trying to have a conversation around this very thing. We're looking at the various different digital dilemmas that people are facing from all of these different pressures, both the societal and the technological and so on. And it's both exciting and also a time that is fraught with, I don't really want to say danger, because it's more around sort of, there's opportunity and risk in what's going on right now. There's tremendous opportunity to use this the coming technology to include more people, but equally there's the risk of introducing bias and everything else. And potentially excluding people as we onboard and design new technologies and haven't sort of gone through the process, right?
Yeah, and one of the big themes at the summit was, we saw this, and it's no surprise, how people with disabilities need to be involved in planning and decision making, but there wasn't really a lot of discussion about how you do that. How are we actually going to engage people? How are we going to get their opinion, their views, their perspectives? And remembering one of the biggest myths is that there is one voice for people with disabilities. I've never been in a meeting with my colleagues and friends with disability and seen any consensus or agreement on one single issue.
No, true.
But then, I've never been in any meeting about anything where I've seen that. So, it isn't just one voice. It is a diversity. There are all sorts of different people with different views and opinions. How do we draw upon all of those is going to be really important if these technological innovations are going to have impact. And that's why I thought the summit, hopefully would have been important, because hopefully we'd hear some of that diversity of opinion.
David, just for, I know a lot of the people that are watching the video know who you are, but can we back up a little, because we've been really honored to have you on the show a couple of times. But one thing I'd like you to do is reintroduce yourself and talk about your work, and also, and of course, we really like having you on the program because you are a global expert talking about disruption from the perspective of disability inclusion, assistive technology, and accessibility. And so I would like you to do that. But also, there is a lot of disruption in the United States happening right now with all of these companies buying each other. They're buying each other, and they're not just doing it in the US. They're reaching out and they're trying to grab as many other companies as possible, and companies are being courted in Europe and the UK and all over the world. And so, as these, which is always an interesting thing when an industry starts having that type of disruption. And some of the disruption, which I think is logical, is like companies like Freedom Scientific, which is a maker of JAWS, screen reader, and other tools, now having professional services accessibility group when they brought in the Paciello group, which is focused on accessibility, and we've had them on the program. And then they bought Kathy Walbin's group, Interactive Accessibility. And so all this disruption happening, and so now it's VFO, and they had made a comment in their press release that they're now a one-stop shop because they have assistive technology and accessibility. Now, of course, there's so much more to including people with disabilities than just those two pieces, but there's quite a bit of disruption happening all over the world, including disruption with, assistive technology rolling into, mainstream technology. But I'm just curious what you're seeing, and please remind our audience who you are too.
Okay. Right. So yes, I'm David. So my background has been in the development and evolution of assistive technology services. So dating back to when I was working here in the UK and within Europe, and during the time when I was in Qatar in the Middle East, we began to look at the dimensions that influence successful assistive technology implementation. And this I described as an assistive technology ecosystem. And it was things like awareness, appropriate assessment and evaluation of needs. It was about how technology was made available, and so on. And so we had these 8 areas that really were saying all of these areas need to be coordinated and organized if technology is to be successfully used by people with disabilities. And that was fine. That was straightforward. But as we started to apply that model more widely and began to develop a gap analysis using that between what policy aspired to and what was the experience of real users, real people with disability. And we found this reality gap opening up all over the world, both in the affluent West and in low and medium resourced countries as well. Now, what then became interesting, this is where the disruptive innovation began to kick in, is we began to see that some of those gaps were being addressed or actually being made worse because of very widespread change happening around assistive technology. Part of that was around the changing expectations of users of their devices and their services. Part of that was around changing expectations and use of technology, and really significant technology trends taking place. we saw that the ability to implement that ecosystem was hugely influenced by cost imperatives, and that driven by the massive change in demographics, with more people wanting accessible technology. And what was really important in determining the impact of disruptive innovation was how the community was involved and engaged in that discussion. And that was really what drove me forward into the sort of work that I'm doing now, because that ecosystem was influenced by the potential changes happening in other areas of people's lives. For instance, the whole concept of on-demand service. We were talking the other day, I can't remember the last time I sat down and waited for a TV show to be broadcast each week. That's not how I consume my entertainment now. So people's consumption of accessible and assistive technologies, they wanted it to be on demand in the same way. They want their content to be on demand. So my work and the work I've been doing over the last few years has very much been thinking about, with all this change, innovation happening most broadly in society and specifically with people with disabilities, how does this impact on the development and design of products? How does it develop upon the industry, and how does it develop and define the services that support implementation?
So David, let's try to follow up your answer. Now, we also have seen that assistive technology has become more affordable.
Yep.
Sometimes we even have products that are not really designed for that purpose, but end up being quite good supporting some users, not everyone. At the same time, the users themselves, different generations, have become more sophisticated, and somehow more independent how they use technology. How do you see organizations who have in the past dealt with this type of users and people following up at the sophistication of the technology, the sophistication of the users? How do you think they are adapting to this reality?
Well, one of the things that we saw was that increasingly people were self-determining their own technology choices. So they were finding information through peers, through social media, through friends, through family, and then making a decision as to what to use and purchase. Now, this really is quite significant, because traditionally, if you wanted assistive technology such as a screen reader, you would go to a government service or a private facility. They would assess your needs, and you would possibly be given the money to buy a piece of equipment. In the new model and in the new area we see, information is made available by NGOs and public services. People with disabilities find that information, and then they find, in many cases, they can get the technology they need very quickly, very cheaply, or for free. So it's an on-demand response. I'm blind and I want to use my iPhone. This is how I switch on and use VoiceOver. I want a screen reader for my PC. I can download NVDA for free, and so on and so on. So that really changes the relationship between services, the product developers, and of course, the people with disabilities, the consumers themselves.
So I think absolutely we've got a lot of stuff out in the public space now. There's amazing innovation in terms of the model of delivery, which has changed significantly. You've got it's not just in assistive tech, but the whole sort of freemium or advertising supported or sponsorship supported free software model has been tremendously disruptive in general, but is now disrupting in the accessibility space. And I think that if we're going back to what Deborah was alluding to in terms of the acquisitions that are happening, particularly in North America, as there's consolidation going on, and we've talked about this just earlier off camera, it feels a bit like the circling of the wagons. You know, it's absolutely a defensive move to a certain extent by the incumbents that have, you know, charged significant amounts of money for their long-term developed software. You know, they've spent a lot of time, effort developing these assistive technology tools, and you know they're established in the market. But this disruption is coming along now, and the freemium model doesn't work for them particularly. So what are they going to do? They're going to consolidate, and it feels like a bit of a defensive position, or they're looking to find ways of creating scale that can then mean that they're sustainable.
Yeah, and one of the things that they've got, and I think this is one of the reasons why you're seeing these consolidations, is you've got a lot of data around design from one company that can feed into others and can then be used from a consultancy perspective to influence future design from other companies. So if you are a company that is an expert in screen readers and magnification, you've got huge data sets in terms of people's preferences, people's use of the technology. That data is of huge value to big IT companies who now want to develop inclusive products. So what we're doing is those initial products are now creating the data sets that actually influence universal design from others. So that consolidation is also a way of trying to help shape disruptive innovation as well, because new people will come into the market. They will draw upon that experience, but their solution will be completely different. I think probably the best example of this just recently was the Orbit Braille note taker.
Yes.
Which comes out at what, 10-15% of traditional prices, because it's learned from the experience of the other companies, but actually changed the technologies by which the Braille is represented, and hence the price plummeted. So, you know, really interesting use of large amounts of data of user preferences to create a product which met the need, which was for a low-cost, entry-level Braille note taker. Think about that pressure of economics. If you can get 8 of these devices for the price of one traditional device, that's got to be sensible. It's got to help reach more people. And I think, you know, we should welcome that. And it puts pressure on those traditional companies to not just simply add more and more functionality to their existing devices, but actually think, what is the core purpose of the device? And is that actually fit enough to be fit for purpose? And if it is, then people will switch to it.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. And I was privileged enough this week to host Gabriela Michetti, who's the Vice President of Argentina at our offices in London. And they're looking at how they can deploy assistive technology throughout their country, looking at ways that they can address the needs of their populace. And of course, price is a factor here. It is always going to be when you want to scale. So these kind of things that are being done by organizations like the people behind Orbit, and I know Kevin Carey's very passionate about what he's helped to create here, are really important, because that really significant shift in the cost to an individual or the cost to a nation, because often it's, you know, funded at a national level, should enable far more people to gain access to work and education and knowledge than they have previously, where technology has been very expensive.
Yeah, and it's been one of the things that I've been doing recently, and for me, it's been really interesting. I've been working a little bit with the World Health Organization GATE initiative on the 50 assistive products list. It's the priority list of 50 products that need to be available across the world. And they divide up broadly into 2 groups. Half of them are around mobility, personal care, health needs. But the other half are much more around access to information, communication, and so on. And about half of them can now be delivered. The functionality can be delivered on your smartphone. Now, underpinning the priority assistive products list is a whole bunch of thought and research around distribution. How do you get technology into the hands of people? And here's where things get interesting, because if we can do half of those on our phones, there's actually only one way for a handset to get access to that technology, which is you go to the App Store or you go to Google Play. Fundamentally, that's the only way users get access to the apps, software, and solutions they want. Now, if that's the case, a whole distribution mechanism for a country like Argentina says if that is the way people have become familiar with downloading books, games, movies, the lessons learned from that experience are the ones we should apply in our distribution model, our innovative distribution model for Argentina in assistive technologies. Because at least half of those 50 priority list can be delivered that way at low cost to large numbers of people, if they have the handsets and if they have connectivity.
But one of the things that is still difficult when we use those stores is to be able to make good choices and to understand what should we be using. Do you think there's space for for Apple or for Google to implement an extra layer that brings users to be able to choose better tools or have better access to a type of a classification of tools in terms of how accessible they are? Because they have that type of classification in other sectors, let's say for kids.
First of all, let's remember that many of these solutions sell at very, very low price. So I was talking to a guy and he said to me, I downloaded 6 different magnification packages for my iPhone. I said, wow, that's a lot. He said, that all of that came to about $4. So he was saying to me, really, you know what? If it's only going to cost me $4 to try all 6, then choose the one I want, it's not really a problem. 3 of them he thought was awful. 3 of them were great. And he chose one, which is the one he uses every day. So that's our first issue, is that the cost and risk is reducing significantly. I do think, and I do agree with you completely, Antonio, there is a need to curate and organize the information around products so that people can make informed decisions. There is a big risk that certain products get hyped beyond their actual ability to deliver. And then, the media, both social media and traditional media, this is always going to happen. So those networks of curated information, and I believe it's the role of experts in the future, is not so much to do assessment and guide individuals, but for the vast majority of disabled people, is to curate, organize information so they can use it, retrieve it, and make decisions based on it.
That's a very interesting point, David. I think that a lot of people are used to trying stuff out now. I have to have the fairly regular clear outs of apps on my phone because I've downloaded stuff just to try it and never used it again. And it's not that I haven't got space, because it's actually these days the amount of storage you got on your phone is pretty good. It's more that I just get lost in the number of icons that I've got littering my screen. And I also take on board Antonio's point. Effectively, we do need some curation. But what about the sort of burden of exploring and understanding how to use this tech? Because that's fine for me to experiment. I'm a fairly seasoned user of tech. I work in the technology field. I play around with technology all the time. Not everyone with a disability is going to be particularly technology savvy. How can we help people learn to use the technology if, you know, if it's sort of uncontrolled and it's just sort of experimental and everything else, because they may find it difficult. So they may download one, for example, have a bad experience with it, and then decide, well, maybe all of the others are bad. It's not a cost barrier. It's more of a sort of barrier because they're not particularly technology savvy.
I think one of the things that we're seeing is that there's lots of channels and ways of getting that information. Probably, you know, one of the most effective is YouTube. So, you know, Neil, I know that you have dyslexia and you may use one or other products to do that. Now, if you want to learn to use a specific product like Claro Read or Text Help, you can go onto YouTube, and the manufacturers have put up lots of simple, short tutorials on how to use the product. So, you know, that's one way in which people are getting access to that. And what we were finding when we were looking at different countries, and we visited 6 countries around the world, is that channels like WhatsApp and Facebook groups, people with disabilities were talking to each other on those and telling each other about things that work, that didn't work, and why. Now, the risk was that some of those were being influenced by vendors who would put information into them. But where they were moderated, you know, that was discouraged, and that was changing over time. So actually, there were a lot of sources, non-centralized resources in many ways, which people were using to help make their decision, and more importantly, as you said, help them to understand how to use it effectively once they've got it.
Excellent. I know you've got a comment, Deborah. Or a question. I just wanted to say, actually, I love YouTube, and yes, you've got spot on. When I need to know how to do something, I end up going to YouTube.
Yeah, and I started doing these things a couple of months ago called 3-minute thoughts. Now they last about between 5 and 7 minutes, but there's probably about 3 minutes of thinking in them. So, you know, it's an accurate title, but perhaps a little bit deceptive. Editing, short, succinctness, as you can tell, is not my best attribute. But what we tried to do was to take one very, very specific issue, such as what is augmentative and alternative communication, and produce a short 3-minute animated video answering that question. Not to say this is the complete answer, but this is a starting point for you to find out more. It will tell you some basic things to search for, to spread out into curated content. And certainly more and more. And, you know, when I was working in the Middle East, is a good example. Many people there said that reading was difficult, and reading in English really difficult. So short videos are really important. And here's what's great. You use YouTube, you use the auto caption feature, and then you can say to somebody, you want to subtitle this for another language? Download the caption file, translate it, upload it back up again.
And what I can say in relation to that, once you do that, you know, if the videos are up to 3 minutes, you should definitely bring them natively to LinkedIn and Twitter, because what we have observed is the number of viewers of a video when it is launched gets a lot more viewers on Twitter and LinkedIn than on YouTube.
Yes.
Now, in the long term, you get more viewers on YouTube, but in the short term, you get a lot more viewers on the other two.
And we know the other thing which is interesting with that, Antonio, that people who view it on Facebook and Twitter tend not to switch the sound on. They follow the video using the captions, regardless of hearing or anything else. I know I do this. You know, there'll be some advert for a film come up, and I realize that I've seen the whole trailer and never switched the sound on. Because the setting I'm in means that to switch the sound on would actually be quite disruptive to other people. So here's another reason why that universal design, that trend in the way we consume information, has disruptive innovation implications for people who are deaf.
I agree. And we have seen, this is an old stat, but Facebook had put out a statistic saying that 80 to 85% of the videos watched on on Facebook were watched with the sound off. And so we are always trying to make the point, do your videos, because we learned a lot. I'm also a huge fan of YouTube, but if you're not captioning, and it's so easy now to caption things. I just did human potential at work, and we had a live captioner, and it was interesting. We had, like, happen sometimes, misspellings in the captions and things like that. And so the captioner is actually going back and correcting those, but it can be done, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be doing it, except I think a lot of it is the perception that people don't know how to do it. It's going to be too hard. It's too much trouble. Well, if 85% of people are watching your videos with the sound on, and you're not telling your story effectively, or you're a person with a disability that needs those captions, I don't know why you're even doing it, because you're going to waste your time. But I think it's exciting. But another thing, and you already started addressing it, as Neil and Tony were asking questions, but with the aging of societies and, many more people acquiring disabilities as they age, how is all this disruption impacting those users? I had a customer that I'm not going to say their name, but a very, very large customer, and they were calling the older users and maybe the users that were not as sophisticated with technology, they called them laggers. And I, encourage them not to, because you know how people, that always gets out. It always gets out. People might talk about it on a show like we're doing, but I'm not going to name the company. But instead of judging older people and people that are, for whatever reason, not able to keep up with the technology. And there's so many reasons, economic, blah, blah, blah. But, how is all this disruption happening with them? And I know you've worked a lot with, you've done a lot, and you really care about the refugee situations happening all over the world. We know all this is tying into what the UN's trying to do with the Sustainable Development Goals, but how is it impacting other people? And I'm going to, where I'm going with this, because you and I had this conversation, and you brought up caregivers, and you brought it up in a way that I had not thought about. And as soon as you brought it up, I was like, oh, that's troubling. So,
yeah. So, I mean, that conversation you and I had was particularly around the development of smart homes. And so as more and more smart home technology becomes available, there is less need for professional caregiving to deliver the same things. So, for instance, having your apartment cleaned, having meals prepared, and so on. Increasingly, you can do this through the use of technology. Now, so we've got two things that could happen as a result of this, and this is going to impact upon caregivers. The first thing is that they may just lose their jobs. There may be less and less demand for hours of support. And less willingness to invest in those hours of support. The other option is that it really changes what we mean by social care, and puts the influence and the impact on social rather than care. So that your support, your carers, your caregivers are there to help you at a social level, going out into the community, meeting people, connecting with people, rather than preparing a meal or making sure the bathroom is clean.
And it's interesting, as a lot of our viewers know, I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and she's 31 years old, and I'm working so hard to keep her socialized, but she actually fights me on it. What she wants to do, this very common, she just wants to be on her technology, and quite frankly, us all to leave her alone so she can dig into her technology and be all these different people that she is on technology. And so sometimes I worry when we're talking about providing technology, smart homes and stuff like that for our aging population and for people with disabilities, that I'm hoping that as a society, we're not just going to say, here's some technology, go be happy. And the loneliness continues, which is not what you're saying, David.
No,
because you're talking about socializing, but I don't want people to accidentally do that, because we know that this is a problem. And it's very interesting. I'll say one more thing. I was on a panel with you, David, at the Enabling event in DC. that Frances West so eloquently facilitated. But one of the panel members, one of the researchers, remember she was talking about the seal, that they thought this is, you know, narrow AI was a little seal.
That was Amanda Lazar. Fantastic work, really fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for, I couldn't remember her last name, but it was amazing work. But she was saying that what they found was they created this assistive, this AI seal to help with loneliness. But they found that when they gave it to the people with very, you know, late stage Alzheimer's and things like that, they used it was a more effective tool when they used it with their children that were visiting and their friends that were visiting. I was so interested in that point.
And I remember you and I talking at that panel about what we didn't want to see was technology being used as a sticking plaster for a fragmented and disrupted society.
Well said.
That was our fear, that actually, because families don't support each other in the ways which they would have done traditionally, or which they still do in other parts of the world, applying technology does not fix that underlying problem. It just glues the edges together for a while.
Yeah, yeah. Well
said. Yeah, it's great, and you know, things like the work around social emotional needs and technology are so important for the future. And, you know, and we know, I think all of us have this concern about the implications of technology on mental health, both positive and constructive, and negative and destructive.
Right.
Both are a reality. How we fix that in going forward with increasing levels of innovation, new technology, new ways to interact both physically in the world and virtually. Something Neil said right early on, the ethical issues. What does this mean? What's the bias that we need to deal with? And I think one of the things that we will see is that those companies who are disrupting, who are doing disruptive innovation, those are some of the things they're going to have to think about in the coming few years.
Antonio, I know you had a follow-up. You're on mute, by the way.
Dave, you were talking about carers and the way how some of those services might change.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion, why do you think organizations who are doing that type of service should be preparing themselves for the next, let's say, 5 years? What should they have in mind in order to adjust to the changes that are coming?
So I think the first thing I would say to them is look really hard outside of the disability movement about how technology is being used in the home. You know, we've got things like Amazon Echo, we've got smart lighting, we've got smart doors. Lots of things can be done now. You can buy robots that you can set running at the beginning of the day, and they've hoovered your house up by 2 hours later, and so on. So there's lots of things that can be done automatically. If you understand what is possible there, that then lets you do that same principle of a gap analysis. What is still missing in the lives of people to encourage them and support them to live independently? And that those services for carers need to focus much more on quality of interaction, of understanding the person, of actually supporting their social and emotional needs as much as their day-to-day living needs. I think these are the factors that we relate. So care services have got to evolve to understand that a person is more than their basic health needs.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and yeah, we need to be thinking about the whole person rather than just, you know, the physicality. It's the mental health. It's the well-being, the connection with a wider society, which technology is both an enabler of connectivity and also tends to isolate us. You know, we see the jokes about people all being sat at the families all being sat at the dinner table on their phones, not talking to each other. I am very bad at that. But
I think it's
equally,
I think really interesting. Neil, I got a very similar example.
Yeah.
Last time all of our family were together, we were sat around watching something on TV, and we're watching the same program.
Yeah.
All of us had a phone or tablet in our hand.
Yeah.
And then we realized that what we were doing actually was searching for stuff related to what we were watching.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Because suddenly somebody would say, hey, you know that guy? He was in that comedy series we hated. He's actually all right all of a sudden. What's changed? Or what they'll say, what's that background music? I know that's The Cure or something.
It.
So
yes, exactly.
You're integrating so the fact that you've got a phone in your hand doesn't mean you're not communicating with the people you've got a shared experience with. What you're actually doing is connecting to information and data and bringing that in. Now, the key thing is we're already seeing a lot of that is already available through the television anyway. I don't know if you guys use Netflix, but I think they have this thing called X-ray, where it tells you, as you're watching it, it's telling you which actors are on screen, who they are. It will tell you if there's a piece of music playing, who it's by, and so on. And I love it. It's all that stuff that my family tells me, no, I don't need to listen to them anymore. I just get it anyway.
Well, it's always good not to listen to family, right?
Yeah. That's what they tell me as well.
Parental privilege. Yeah. Yeah. No, but you're right. I use your phone for multiple things, and also I've got a colleague, Paul Moore Olmsted, who is director for innovation for us. We're working in media, and we work with organisations like the BBC and others who are looking at how you interact deeply interactive media, and it's that sort of multiple screens thing going on. Yeah. There's multiple interactions going on. You're not only finding out information, but you may be actually having a back channel conversation with your friends about this stuff who are sat elsewhere as well. So
and if I was going to summarize where that trend's taking us, thinking about the immediate future, just think of the potential of wearables, augmented reality, to blend and merge our experience, to bring in data to what's happening, to the socializing that's taking place. That is going to have an impact. That is going to disrupt the way in which we interact with one another and more widely. Be exciting, or it could be disastrous. Come back to the Global Disability Summit. The next few years will tell us which one of those it's going to be.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Deborah, did you want to say something?
No, I'm just hopeful that it's going to go right for us all.
Yeah. Well, we have to, plan for the worst, hope for the best, right? So, thank you very much, David. It's been a fascinating chat, as always. We need to say thank you for Barclays for their continued support. Look forward to you joining us on Tuesday for a chat on Twitter. Fantastic.
Look forward to it.
Thank you.
It's in the diary. Take care.
Yes. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.